The hum of the airplane engines vibrated through my bones as I tried to settle into the narrow economy seat. Even in the climate-controlled cabin, sweat beaded along my hairline, a mixture of anxiety and the lingering Miami heat. My fingers trembled slightly as I checked, for the fourth time, that Jamie's pacifier was within reach in the diaper bag stuffed under the seat in front of me. "Shh, baby boy, we're almost there," I whispered, bouncing my 8-month-old son gently on my lap. His little face was flushed, lower lip quivering with the threat of another crying spell. The elderly woman across the aisle had already shot us 3 disapproving glances, and we hadn't even taken off yet. I couldn't blame her. Who wants to sit near a potentially screaming infant on a 5-hour flight? But what choice did I have? My mother was dying. Actually dying this time, not one of her usual dramatic ploys for attention. And this was likely the last chance for her to meet her grandson. The borrowed money for these tickets sat like a stone in my stomach. 3 months' worth of rent from Lisa, my only friend who still believed in me despite everything. "Pay me back whenever you can," she'd said. But we both knew whenever might be never. A shadow fell across my lap, and I instinctively curled my body over Jamie's. 3 years of single motherhood had taught me to protect first, look second. "Excuse me." The voice was deep, with the faintest accent I couldn't place. Something European, refined yet with a rough edge that made my skin prickle. I looked up, and up, and up. He stood in the aisle, imposing in a suit that probably cost more than 6 months of my salary at the diner. Charcoal gray, perfectly tailored to broad shoulders, no tie, just the hint of a crisp white collar against olive skin. But it was his eyes that froze me in place. Dark as espresso, heavy-lidded, assessing me with cool detachment. "I believe that's my seat," he said, nodding toward the window space beside me. Of course I'd be trapped against this walking GQ cover for 5 hours while struggling with a fussy baby. The universe's sense of humor was particularly cruel today. "Sorry," I mumbled, trying to gather Jamie and my belongings to let him through. My son chose that exact moment to drop his teething ring, which rolled under the seat in front of us. "I've got it." The stranger bent down with unexpected grace for someone his size, retrieving the plastic ring. Instead of handing it back, he pulled out a pristine handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the ring thoroughly before passing it to me, careful not to let our fingers touch. The gesture was both considerate and slightly insulting. Was he afraid of catching something from me? From my baby? "Thank you," I said stiffly, wedging myself against the middle armrest to give him space to pass. He slid into his seat with surprising economy of movement. A subtle scent traveled with him. Not cologne, but something more elemental. Sandalwood, maybe, with notes of leather and something metallic I couldn't identify. The smell of money, of power. Jamie whimpered again, his little fists balling up against my chest. "First flight?" the man asked. His voice was neutral, yet something in his tone suggested the question was purely rhetorical. He already knew the answer. "Is it that obvious?" I attempted a smile that felt more like a grimace. He didn't smile back, just gave a slight nod, and turned his attention to the window as the flight attendant began the safety demonstration. I noticed his hands resting on his thighs, large, with neatly trimmed nails, but the knuckles were slightly misshapen, a fighter's hands, incongruous with the expensive suit and aristocratic profile. The plane began to taxi, and Jamie's whimpers escalated to full-blown wails. The heat of embarrassment flooded my cheeks as I frantically dug through the diaper bag for his bottle. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. "May I?" The question startled me. The man was holding out his hand. "What?" "The bottle. You're about to spill it. Let me hold it while you adjust the baby." Surprised, I handed it over, then repositioned Jamie in the crook of my arm. When I looked up, my seatmate was testing the temperature of the formula on his wrist, the motion so practiced it momentarily stunned me. "It's good," he said, passing it back. Our fingers brushed this time, and an unexpected current traveled up my arm. His skin was warm, dry, slightly calloused. Jamie latched onto the bottle immediately, his cries silenced. The relief was so intense I nearly sobbed. "Thank you." Again. The man inclined his head slightly but said nothing more. As the plane lifted off, I felt the pressure change in my ears, and Jamie's eyelids began to droop, the gentle ascent lulling him to sleep. The next hour passed in blessed silence. I managed to transfer Jamie to the baby carrier strapped to my chest, where he continued to sleep, his warm weight both comforting and constricting. My own exhaustion began to catch up with me. 3 nights of double shifts at the diner, followed by packing and panicking about this trip, had left me running on fumes. I tried to fight it, knowing I shouldn't fall asleep with Jamie in the carrier, but my eyelids felt weighted with lead. The gentle drone of the engines, the slight vibration of the cabin, the warmth of my son against my chest. It was all conspiring against my determination to stay awake. My head nodded forward once, twice. The third time, I jerked awake to find it resting against something firm yet yielding. Horror dawned slowly as I realized I'd been leaning against my seatmate's shoulder. "I'm so sorry," I gasped, straightening up so quickly that a pain shot through my neck. "It's fine." His voice was low, measured. "You need the rest more than I need the shoulder space." Before I could formulate a response, a flight attendant appeared at our row. "Can I get you anything to drink?" she asked, her gaze lingering appreciatively on my seatmate. "Water for the lady," he replied, "and I'll take a scotch. Neat." "Of course, sir." Her smile brightened. Right away. I hadn't even been asked what I wanted, but water was exactly what I needed. How did he know? "You don't have to," I began. "It wasn't a question." He cut me off, not unkindly, but firmly enough to silence my protest. The flight attendant returned with our drinks, placing them on our trays with an extra flourish for him. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Castellano?" So she knew him. Or at least knew of him. "That will be all for now, thank you." His dismissal was polite, but absolute. She retreated, looking slightly disappointed. Castellano. The name niggled at something in my memory, but exhaustion was making my thoughts sluggish. "You should drink," he said, nodding toward my untouched water. "Dehydration makes the fatigue worse." I obeyed without thinking, draining half the cup in one go. The cool liquid revived me slightly. "I'm Ellie," I said, not sure why I was introducing myself to this intimidating stranger. "This is Jamie." He regarded me for a long moment, those dark eyes unreadable. "Luca," he finally offered. No last name, though the flight attendant had already provided it. "Thank you for being understanding about—" I gestured vaguely to Jamie and myself. "Children are innocent," he said, the words carrying a weight that suggested layers of meaning I couldn't decipher. "They deserve patience." Something in his tone made me look at him more closely. There was a hardness to his features, the sharp line of his jaw, the slight crease between his brows, but also something else, a sadness perhaps, or a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Are you a father?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. His expression didn't change, but I felt him tense beside me. "No." The single syllable closed the door on that line of conversation so firmly I could almost hear it slam. I turned my attention back to Jamie, adjusting the carrier slightly to ease the pressure on my shoulders. The movement woke him, and he blinked up at me with those big blue eyes. His father's eyes. Though I tried not to think about that, he made a small sound of discontent, his face scrunching up in preparation for a cry. Before I could react, Luca reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small wooden object. It looked handcrafted, a smooth oval with intricate patterns carved into the surface. "May I?" he asked, holding it up for my inspection. I nodded, curious. He held the wooden piece in front of Jamie, rotating it slowly. The light caught the polished surface, creating shifting patterns that immediately captivated my son. His impending cry transformed into a gurgle of interest, his tiny hands reaching toward the object. "It's a worry stone," Luca explained, his voice dropping to a hypnotic murmur. "My grandfather carved it." Jamie's eyes followed the stone's movement, mesmerized. Luca continued the gentle motion. And to my amazement, my son's eyelids began to droop again. "How did you do that?" I whispered as Jamie drifted back to sleep. The corner of Luca's mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but close. "Children respond to calm authority." Something about the way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. Not fear, exactly, but awareness. This man was used to being obeyed. The next wave of exhaustion hit me like a physical force. Despite the water, despite my determination to stay alert, my body was surrendering to days of accumulated fatigue. My vision blurred around the edges, and I felt myself swaying slightly in my seat. Sleep. Luca's voice seemed to come from far away. "I'll wake you if he stirs." I wanted to protest, to explain that I never entrusted Jamie to strangers, but my body betrayed me. The last thing I remembered was the gentle pressure of a hand guiding my head to rest against a solid shoulder, and the faint scent of sandalwood enveloping me like a blanket. I woke with a jolt to the sound of soft murmuring. For a moment, I was disoriented, my mind struggling to piece together where I was. The steady hum of engines, the recycled air, the airplane. Jamie. Panic shot through me as I realized my arms were empty. The baby carrier? He's here. Luca's voice, low and reassuring, came from beside me. He was getting restless in the carrier, too confining. I turned to find my son cradled expertly in Luca's arms, happily gumming on the wooden worry stone. The sight was so incongruous, this intimidating man in his perfect suit holding my baby with practiced ease, that for a moment I could only stare. "You should have woken me," I said, reaching for Jamie. "You needed the rest." Luca transferred my son back to me with such careful precision that Jamie barely registered the change. "Besides, we've been getting acquainted, haven't we, little one?" The tenderness in his voice when he addressed my son was so unexpected it made my throat tight. Jamie gurgled in response, his eyes bright with recognition as he reached toward Luca. "He likes you," I said, surprised. Jamie was usually wary of strangers, especially men. "Children and animals," Luca replied cryptically. "They see what adults miss." A flight attendant, a different one this time, paused at our row. "We'll be landing in about 30 minutes, Mr. Castellano. Is there anything you or your family need before descent?" Family. The word hung in the air between us. I opened my mouth to correct her, but Luca spoke first. "We're fine, thank you. Perhaps a fresh bottle for our boy?" Our boy. The words hit me like a physical blow. Our boy. Not her son or the baby, but our boy. As if Jamie belonged to both of us, as if we were a unit, a family. The flight attendant nodded and moved on, leaving me frozen in shock beside this stranger who had just casually claimed partial ownership of my child. "Why did you say that?" I whispered, clutching Jamie closer. Luca turned those dark, unreadable eyes on me. "Say what exactly?" "Our boy. You said our boy." "Jamie is my son." "Of course he is." His tone was placating, but something flashed in his eyes, something possessive and determined that made my heart race with an emotion I couldn't name. It was simply easier than correcting her assumption. But there was nothing simple about the way he was looking at Jamie now, as if memorizing every feature of my son's face. Nothing simple about the deliberate way his hand brushed against mine as he reached out to touch Jamie's cheek. "What do you want?" The question came out sharper than I intended, loud enough to make the passenger in front of us turn around briefly. Luca leaned closer, his voice dropping to a murmur meant for my ears alone. "Right now?" "To make sure you and the boy get to your destination safely. After that..." He let the sentence hang unfinished. A promise or a threat. I couldn't tell which. The plane began its descent, the subtle change in pressure making my ears pop. Jamie whimpered at the sensation, and I bounced him gently, trying to soothe him while my mind raced with confusion and the first flickers of fear. Who was this man really? What did he want with us? And why did part of me, some traitorous, lonely part, respond to the possessive heat in his gaze? As the ground rushed up to meet us, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake, that falling asleep on Luca Castellano's shoulder had somehow changed the course of my life irrevocably, that I was now caught in a web I hadn't even seen being spun around me. The wheels touched down with a jolt that seemed to echo through my entire body. I had no idea what awaited us beyond the airport gates, but one thing was becoming terrifyingly clear. Luca Castellano had no intention of letting Jamie and me walk away. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to find out what happens next in this thrilling story. Hit that notification bell so you won't miss the next part of Ellie and Jamie's journey with the mysterious Luca Castellano. What does he really want with them? Leave your predictions in the comments below. The terminal was a blur of noise and motion as I clutched Jamie to my chest, trying to navigate through the crowd while keeping one eye on Luca Castellano's imposing figure ahead of me. He moved with effortless authority, the sea of travelers parting before him like he commanded some invisible force field. I hadn't asked him to escort us through the airport. In fact, I'd fully intended to mumble a quick thank you and goodbye at the gate, then disappear into the anonymity of the terminal. But somehow, between deplaning and now, Luca had taken control of the situation, and me, with such natural command that I found myself following him without question. "My car is waiting," he stated when we reached the baggage claim area, his tone making it clear this wasn't up for debate. "I'm taking a taxi," I countered, finding my voice at last. Jamie squirmed against me, sensing my tension. "My mother's expecting us." Luca's dark eyes swept over me, taking in my wrinkled sundress, the worn diaper bag hanging from my shoulder, the exhaustion I could feel etched into every line of my face. His expression remained impassive, but something flickered in those depths. Calculation, perhaps. "It's nearly midnight," he said, checking a watch that probably cost more than my annual income. "Your mother lives in Brookhaven, yes?" My blood ran cold. "How do you know that?" The hint of a smile touched his lips, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "You mentioned it during the flight." Had I? The hours on the plane felt dreamlike now, hazy with exhaustion and the strange intimacy that can develop between strangers in transit. Had I really told this man where my mother lived? What else had I revealed in my sleep-deprived state? "A taxi to Brookhaven will cost you at least $80 at this hour," he continued, "and the driver might refuse altogether given the distance. My car is already paid for, and the detour is minimal." Before I could formulate a response, a man appeared at Luca's side, tall, broad-shouldered, with a military short haircut, and eyes that scanned continuously, assessing every passerby as a potential threat. He wore a suit similar to Luca's, though not quite as fine, and stood with his hands clasped in front of him. "Everything is prepared, sir," he said quietly, his gaze flickering briefly to Jamie and me before returning to Luca. "Thank you, Marco." Luca nodded toward the carousel, where luggage was beginning to appear. "The lady's bag?" "A small blue suitcase," I said before I could stop myself, with a yellow ribbon on the handle. Marco moved toward the carousel without another word. "You have people who just wait for you?" I asked, unable to mask my disbelief. "I have people who ensure things run smoothly," Luca corrected, his attention now focused on Jamie, who had begun to fuss. "He needs changing." It wasn't a question, and I resented his assumption, even as I recognized he was right. "I'll take care of it before we leave. The facilities here are inadequate." Again, that tone of absolute certainty. "The car has everything you need." Part of me wanted to refuse on principle, to assert some independence in what was quickly becoming a situation where I had none. But Jamie's whimpers were escalating, and the thought of wrestling with him in a grimy airport bathroom stall was decidedly unappealing. "Fine," I conceded, shifting Jamie to my other hip. But then straight to my mother's, no detours. Something that might have been amusement crossed Luca's features. "Of course." Marco returned with my pitiful suitcase, which looked even shabbier next to their pristine appearance. Without comment, he took the diaper bag from my shoulder as well, ignoring my protests. "This way," Luca said, placing his hand at the small of my back to guide me toward the exit. The touch was light, almost imperceptible through the fabric of my dress, yet it burned like a brand. I wanted to pull away, to establish some boundary between us. But Jamie chose that moment to unleash a full-throated wail, and my attention immediately shifted to him. "Shh, baby, it's okay," I murmured, bouncing him gently as we walked. "We'll get you changed soon." Outside, the Atlanta night was thick with humidity, the air heavy with the scent of jet fuel and asphalt. I'd expected a taxi queue, but Luca led us directly to a sleek black SUV with tinted windows idling at the curb. A third man stood beside it, opening the door as we approached. "Ms. Sullivan," Luca said, gesturing for me to enter first. I froze. "I never told you my last name." For the first time, Luca seemed caught off guard, a flicker of something. Annoyance? Concern? Crossing his face before it settled back into its usual impassive mask. "Your luggage tag," he said smoothly. I noticed it on the plane. Was that true? I couldn't remember if my name was visible on the diaper bag. The alternative, that he'd somehow researched me during our flight, was too disturbing to contemplate. Jamie's cries grew more insistent, and practical concerns won out over my suspicion. I climbed into the SUV, finding myself in the most luxurious vehicle I'd ever seen. The leather seats were butter soft, and the interior smelled of something expensive and subtle. Most surprisingly, a state-of-the-art infant seat was already installed. You can secure him there, Luca said, sliding in beside me as Marco took the front passenger seat. There's a changing station folded into the back of my seat. Sure enough, a hidden compartment revealed a padded changing surface, complete with diapers, wipes, and even a small selection of infant clothes. All high-end brands I could never afford. Why do you have all this? I asked, unable to keep the suspicion from my voice, as I laid Jamie down and began changing him. Luca was silent for a moment, watching as I worked. I believe in being prepared for all contingencies. Having a full nursery set up in your car goes beyond prepared, I countered, snapping Jamie's onesie closed. It's borderline creepy. Is it creepy to ensure a child's comfort? His voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. Would you prefer I left you to struggle at the airport with insufficient resources? Put that way, it made me sound ungrateful. I bit back my retort and focused on securing Jamie in the infant seat, which fit him perfectly. Too perfectly. How did you know his size? I asked quietly. Standard measurements for an 8-month-old, Luca replied without hesitation. Though he's on the smaller side, isn't he? Perhaps underweight? The observation, accurate though it was, sent a spike of defensive anger through me. He's perfectly healthy. The pediatrician says he's just naturally petite. When was his last checkup? That's none of your business, I snapped, finally reaching the limit of my patience. Look, I appreciate the ride, but I don't know you, and you don't know us. So let's just get to my mother's house and say goodbye, okay? Luca studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the dim interior of the car. Finally, he nodded once and tapped on the partition. The driver pulled smoothly away from the curb. The silence that fell between us was charged with unspoken tensions. Jamie, comfortable in his new seat, had quieted, his eyes growing heavy as the motion of the car lulled him back toward sleep. I stared out the window, watching the airport recede and the highway unfold before us, trying to make sense of the bizarre situation I found myself in. Who travels with a baby seat just in case? Who has staff waiting at midnight to escort a woman they just met? The question that had been nagging at me since the plane returned with new urgency. Who was Luca Castellano? You should rest. Luca's voice broke into my thoughts. It's a 40-minute drive to Brookhaven in this traffic. I'm fine, I said automatically, though exhaustion was indeed weighing on me like a physical burden. Your mother's illness, he said after another stretch of silence. Is it terminal? The question caught me off guard. Had I mentioned that too? The doctors think so. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. I'm sorry. His voice held genuine sympathy, and for a moment, the hardness in his features softened. Family is everything. Yes, I agreed quietly, surprised by the sentiment from this enigmatic man. It is. And Jamie's father? The question was casual, but I felt the weight of his attention intensify. Is he in the picture? No. My answer was clipped, final. He never was. Luca nodded as if confirming something to himself. His loss. Something in the way he said it, possessive, almost satisfied, sent a shiver down my spine. I turned to look at him directly, gathering my courage. Mr. Castellano, Luca, he corrected. Luca, I conceded. Why are you doing this? The car, the baby supplies, the ride. What do you want from us? His gaze shifted to Jamie, who had finally succumbed to sleep, his long lashes casting shadows on his chubby cheeks. Perhaps I simply recognize something worth protecting when I see it. We don't need protection, don't you? His eyes returned to mine, dark and knowing. A single mother with no support system except a dying parent? Working... He paused, his gaze dropping to my hands. Double shifts as a waitress, based on those calluses, borrowing money for plane tickets. Tell me, Ellie, what happens when your mother is gone? Who protects you and Jamie then? Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, his blunt assessment cutting too close to the fears that kept me awake at night. We manage. We always have. Management is survival, Luca said, his voice dropping lower. You both deserve more than mere survival. The car slowed, turning onto a residential street I recognized with a pang of nostalgia and dread. My childhood neighborhood, now showing signs of neglect that hadn't been visible when I left 5 years ago. The houses seemed smaller, the lawns less manicured, the streetlights dimmer. Stop the car, I said suddenly. To my surprise, Luca immediately rapped on the partition, and the vehicle pulled to a smooth stop half a block from my mother's house. I want to walk from here, I explained, already reaching to unbuckle Jamie from his seat. It's complicated with my mother, showing up in this kind of car, with you. It would raise questions you're not prepared to answer, Luca finished for me, nodding. I understand. Marco was already retrieving my suitcase from the trunk, and the driver had come around to open my door. I carefully lifted Jamie, who stirred but didn't wake, and cradled him against my chest. Thank you for the ride, I said awkwardly, stepping out onto the cracked sidewalk. The contrast between the luxury of the SUV and the shabbiness of my surroundings couldn't have been more stark. Luca followed me out, standing too close in the humid night air. It was my pleasure. I should have turned and walked away then. Should have put this strange encounter behind me and focused on the difficult days ahead with my mother. Instead, I found myself asking, "Will you be staying in Atlanta long?" A small smile curved his lips, and for the first time, it reached his eyes, transforming his severe features into something almost approachable, almost. "As long as necessary," he replied cryptically. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached out and brushed his fingers against Jamie's cheek. "Sleep well, little one." The gesture was tender, proprietary, and deeply unsettling. Before I could react, Luca's hand moved to my face, his thumb lightly tracing the dark circle under my eye. "You too, Ellie," he murmured. "You need your strength." I stepped back, nearly stumbling on the uneven pavement. "Goodbye, Mr. Castellano." His smile widened fractionally at my reversion to formality. "Until next time." "There won't be a next time," I insisted, clutching Jamie closer. Luca merely inclined his head, neither agreeing nor disagreeing, before sliding back into the SUV. The vehicle pulled away with a quiet purr, leaving me standing on the sidewalk with my sleeping son and a terrible sense that I had just escaped something. Or perhaps walked away from something I desperately needed. My mother's house looked exactly as I remembered. A small bungalow with peeling blue paint and uneven front steps. The porch light was on, a beacon in the darkness, but no silhouette appeared in the window. She probably hadn't heard the car. Taking a deep breath, I started up the walkway, each step feeling heavier than the last. I was almost at the porch when the glint of something metallic caught my eye from across the street. A car I hadn't noticed before, dark, nondescript, was parked under a tree. As I watched, the ember of a cigarette glowed briefly, illuminating a familiar face. Marco. Luca's driver was watching the house, watching us. My heart rate spiked, and I quickly climbed the steps, fumbling for the spare key I knew my mother kept under the ceramic frog by the door. As I let myself in, I cast one more glance over my shoulder. The car was still there, a dark sentinel in the night, and suddenly I understood with perfect clarity. Luca Castellano had no intention of letting us go. This wasn't the end of our strange encounter. It was merely the beginning. The door closed behind me with a finality that should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like the sound of a trap snapping shut. "Ellie? Is that you?" My mother's thin voice called from the back bedroom. "Yeah, Mom," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady as I locked the door, knowing even as I did so that it would provide no real protection from the man who had just delivered us home. "It's us. We're here." The weight of Jamie in my arms, the weight of my dying mother's expectations, and now the weight of Luca Castellano's inexplicable interest. It all pressed down on me until I could barely breathe. What had I done? What invisible thread had I tugged on that plane that had led this dangerous man to our door? And why, Despite the fear churning in my stomach, did part of me feel a treacherous relief at the thought that he was still out there, watching over us. If you're enjoying Ellie and Jamie's story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell. What do you think Luca Castellano really wants with this single mom and her baby? Leave your theories in the comments below and stay tuned for the next part of this thrilling journey. 3 days passed in a fog of hospital visits, hushed consultations with doctors, and the rhythmic beeping of machines. My mother had deteriorated far more rapidly than I'd expected, her once vibrant presence reduced to a thin, jaundiced figure barely strong enough to hold Jamie. "He has your eyes," she whispered, during one of her more lucid moments, her withered fingers tracing the curve of Jamie's cheek. "But that chin, that's all Sullivan's stubbornness." I forced a smile, swallowing the lump in my throat. "The nurses say he's already flirting with them. That's definitely your influence." Her laugh turned into a rattling cough that seemed to shake her entire frame. When it subsided, she fixed me with a gaze that was suddenly, startlingly clear. "You can't stay here, Ellie," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "After I'm gone, this town will swallow you whole, just like it tried to do before." "Mom, don't. Listen to me." Her fingers clutched mine with surprising strength. "You got out once. You made something of yourself." I almost laughed at that. My something was a dingy studio apartment above a laundromat and double shifts at a diner where the manager's wandering hands were considered an occupational hazard. But I bit my tongue. Let her believe I'd escaped the cycle of poverty and disappointment that had defined our family for generations. "Promise me you'll give Jamie better than this," she insisted, her eyes boring into mine. "Promise me you won't come back here to stay." "I promise," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. What choice did I have? There was nothing for us here except memories and debt. She nodded, seemingly satisfied, and closed her eyes. Her breathing evened out, and I knew she'd drifted back to sleep. Or perhaps unconsciousness. The doctors had warned me that the line between the two was blurring more each day. I gently extricated my hand from her grasp and adjusted Jamie in my arms. He'd been remarkably good throughout our hospital visits, as if he somehow sensed the gravity of the situation. Now he gurgled softly, reaching for the colorful tubes and wires that connected my mother to the machines keeping her alive. "Not for you," I murmured, kissing the top of his head. "Never for you." A soft knock at the door made me turn. I expected a nurse or doctor come to check vitals or adjust medication. Instead, I found myself staring into the dark, inscrutable eyes of Luca Castellano. He stood in the doorway, immaculate in another perfectly tailored suit. This one a deep navy that made his olive skin glow in the harsh fluorescent light. In his hands was a modest arrangement of white lilies, their perfume already filling the sterile room. "What are you doing here?" I hissed, instinctively moving to stand between him and my mother's bed. "Paying my respects," he replied, his voice pitched low out of consideration for the sleeping woman. "May I come in?" I wanted to refuse, to send him away, but a strange paralysis had overtaken me. How had he found us? How had he known which hospital, which room? The questions burned in my throat, but before I could voice them, Jamie spotted Luca and let out a delighted squeal, his little arms reaching out toward the imposing figure. Luca's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Hello, little one. Please leave," I managed, my voice steadier than I felt. "This is a private family moment, of course." He nodded, setting the lilies on a small table near the door. "I only came to deliver these, and to inform you that arrangements have been made." "Arrangements?" I echoed, confusion momentarily displacing my anger. "What arrangements?" "For your mother's care," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "She's been moved to the private wing. A specialist is flying in from Johns Hopkins tomorrow to consult on her case." The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "You can't do that." "We can't afford—" "It's done," he interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "The financial aspects have been handled." "By you?" My voice rose despite my efforts to keep it level. "Why would you do that? You don't know us." Something dangerous flickered in his eyes, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "Let's step outside. Your mother needs her rest," He was right about that, at least. I glanced at her sleeping form, then reluctantly followed him into the hallway, closing the door softly behind us. The corridor was quiet, just a few nurses at the distant station, and the muted sounds of medical equipment from neighboring rooms. Jamie continued to squirm in my arms, his eyes fixed on Luca with undisguised fascination. "You had no right," I began, keeping my voice low, but unable to disguise my anger. "I didn't ask for your help, and I certainly can't repay whatever ridiculous sum you've spent on arrangements." "I didn't ask for repayment," Luca replied calmly. "Then what do you want?" I demanded. "Nobody does something like this for nothing." His gaze traveled slowly from my face to Jamie, then back again. A deliberate assessment that made my skin prickle with awareness. Perhaps I simply dislike seeing suffering when I have the means to alleviate it. "Bullshit," I countered, the profanity slipping out before I could stop it. "Men like you don't give handouts to random women they meet on planes. Men like me?" One eyebrow arched elegantly. "And what kind of man am I, Ellie?" The way he said my name, soft, almost caressing, sent an involuntary shiver down my spine. "I don't know," I admitted. "That's the problem. I don't know anything about you except that you're rich and apparently think you can buy your way into our lives." "Not buy," he corrected, taking a step closer. "Invest." The word hung between us, loaded with implications I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. Jamie chose that moment to drop his teething ring, which clattered to the polished hospital floor. Before I could bend to retrieve it, Luca was already kneeling, his movements fluid and precise. Just as he had on the plane, he wiped the toy clean before handing it back. But this time, instead of avoiding contact, his fingers deliberately brushed against mine. The touch sent a jolt of electricity up my arm. "You should eat something," he said, straightening to his full height. "You've lost weight since the flight." The observation, accurate though it was, reignited my irritation. "I'm fine." "You're exhausted and malnourished," he countered flatly. "How can you care for Jamie if you collapse?" The harsh truth of his words stung. I had been subsisting on vending machine snacks and hospital cafeteria coffee, putting Jamie's needs and my mother's comfort above my own. The headaches and dizziness I'd been experiencing were probably warning signs I'd been ignoring. "There's a car waiting downstairs," Luca continued, seemingly taking my silence as acquiescence. "My driver will take you to get a proper meal, then back to your mother's house for some rest. The nurses have my number if there's any change in her condition." "They have your number?" The implications of that, of how thoroughly he had inserted himself into our situation, left me reeling. "How did you even find us? How did you know which hospital she was in?" "Does it matter?" he asked, his expression unreadable. "The result is the same. Your mother is receiving the best possible care, and you have the opportunity to recover your strength." "It matters to me," I insisted, shifting Jamie to my other hip. "I want to know who I'm dealing with." For a long moment, Luca studied me, his dark eyes measuring something I couldn't fathom. Then, with a slight incline of his head, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card. Simple, elegant cream stock, with only his name and a phone number embossed in dark ink. "Call this number anytime," he said, pressing the card into my palm. "Day or night, if you need anything at all." I stared at the card, its weight seeming disproportionate to its size. "This doesn't answer my question." "No," he agreed, a hint of amusement coloring his tone. "It doesn't, but it's a start." Before I could respond, Jamie let out a sharp cry, his patience finally exhausted. Luca's attention immediately shifted to him, his expression softening in a way that transformed his entire face. "He's hungry," Luca observed, reaching out to brush a finger against Jamie's flushed cheek. "And tired. You both need food and rest." As much as I hated to admit it, he was right. The thought of a real meal and a few hours of uninterrupted sleep was almost painfully tempting. "Fine," I conceded, pocketing the business card. "But just dinner and then home, and I want to check on my mother before I leave." "Of course." Luca stepped back, giving me space to return to my mother's room. "Marco is waiting in the lobby. Take as long as you need." I hesitated, suddenly reluctant to turn my back on him. "You're not coming?" Something like satisfaction flickered across his features. "Would you like me to?" "No," I said quickly. Too quickly, perhaps. I assumed you would insist. I don't need to insist, he replied softly. I'm patient, Ellie. When something is inevitable, there's no need to rush. The confidence in his voice, the absolute certainty, should have angered me. Instead, it sent a complicated mixture of emotions spiraling through my chest. Fear, yes, but also a treacherous, unwelcome flutter of anticipation. Nothing about this is inevitable, I told him, lifting my chin defiantly. His smile was slight but knowing. We'll see. With that cryptic response hanging in the air between us, I retreated to my mother's room, feeling his gaze on my back with every step. It wasn't until I closed the door behind me that I realized I was trembling. My mother was still asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. I stood beside her bed, watching the rise and fall of her chest, trying to reconcile the woman I remembered. Fierce, proud, unyielding, with this fragile shell. Mom, I whispered, knowing she couldn't hear me. I don't know what to do. I don't know who he is or what he wants. But I'm scared. Not just of him, but of how tempting it is to let someone else carry this weight for a while. Jamie whimpered against my shoulder, his cries growing more insistent. I bounced him gently, torn between his immediate needs and my vigil at my mother's bedside. I have to go, I told her sleeping form, pressing a kiss to her forehead, but I'll be back tomorrow. I promise. As I turned to leave, my gaze fell on the lilies Luca had brought. They seemed to glow in the dim room, their pristine petals a stark contrast to the clinical surroundings. Beautiful, pure, yet somehow out of place, like Luca himself in our messy, complicated lives. The drive to the restaurant was silent, Marco's imposing presence in the driver's seat discouraging conversation. He took us to a small Italian place tucked away on a side street, its warm lights and rich aromas a world away from the antiseptic hospital environment. Mr. Castellano made arrangements, the host informed me, leading us to a private room in the back where a high chair was already waiting for Jamie. Everything has been taken care of. Of course it had. I was beginning to understand that this was how Luca operated, smoothing paths, removing obstacles, creating spaces where his will could unfold unimpeded. The meal that followed was the best I'd had in months, perhaps years. Simple but exquisite pasta, crusty bread, a glass of wine I initially refused, but eventually accepted. Jamie demolished a bowl of pureed vegetables with such enthusiasm that even Marco cracked a smile. By the time we left, the sky had darkened to deep indigo, stars obscured by Atlanta's light pollution. The car glided through the city streets, and I found myself drifting, the combination of food, wine, and exhaustion pulling me toward sleep. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Marco was opening my door, and we were parked outside my mother's house. The porch light was on. I didn't remember leaving it on, and through the front window I could see a warm glow that suggested lamps had been lit inside as well. Who's in the house? I asked sharply, suddenly alert. Mrs. Vasquez, Marco replied, his voice surprisingly gentle. Mr. Castellano arranged for her to prepare the house for your return. Mrs. Vasquez? The name was vaguely familiar. The housekeeper from 2 streets over? Marco nodded, already lifting my sleeping son from his car seat with practiced ease. She has prepared a crib for the little one and fresh linens for you. I should have been outraged at this further invasion, this presumption that my home needed preparing. Instead, I felt only a bone-deep weariness, and beneath it, a shameful gratitude. The thought of walking into an empty house, of having to make up beds and find clean towels, had been weighing on me more than I'd admitted. Mrs. Vasquez met us at the door, her round face creased with a warm smile. Miss Ellie, she greeted me. It's been too long, and this must be little Jamie. She ushered us inside, where the transformation was immediately apparent. The house was spotless, the musty smell replaced by the scent of lemon polish and something delicious baking. Fresh flowers, not lilies this time, but cheerful daisies, stood in a vase on the coffee table. I've made up your old room, Mrs. Vasquez explained, leading the way, and set up the nursery in the small room next door. Mr. Castellano said the baby might need his own space to sleep properly. She spoke of Luca with such casual familiarity, as if he were an old family friend, rather than a stranger who had inserted himself into our lives 3 days ago. I wanted to question her, to ask what exactly he had told her, but Jamie was stirring in Marco's arms, and my own exhaustion was a physical weight pressing down on me. "Thank you," I managed, accepting my son back from Marco. "This is very kind." Mrs. Vasquez patted my arm. "It's no trouble, dear. I'll be back tomorrow morning to help with breakfast. There's food in the refrigerator if you get hungry during the night." With that, she gathered her things and left, Marco following silently behind her. I locked the door after them, then stood in the entryway, surrounded by the familiar bones of my childhood home now draped in Luca Castellano's influence. In my old bedroom, I found not only fresh linens, but new curtains, a plush area rug that hadn't been there before, and on the bedside table, a state-of-the-art baby monitor already connected to the nursery. The sight of it, this thoughtful, intrusive gesture, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. The nursery itself was a revelation. The small room that had once been my mother's sewing space now contained a beautiful wooden crib, a changing table stocked with supplies, and a rocking chair that looked antique but was clearly new. Soft lamps cast a gentle glow over walls that had been freshly painted a soothing shade of blue. "What do you think, Jamie?" I whispered, carrying him into the room. "A bit much, isn't it?" But my son's eyes were wide with wonder, his little hands reaching for a mobile of stars and moons that hung above the crib. When I laid him down on the impossibly soft mattress, he didn't protest, just gazed up at the mobile with fascination until his eyelids began to droop. I stood watching him fall asleep, my emotions a tangled mess. On one hand, the intrusion was breathtaking in its presumption. On the other, the care evident in every detail spoke of something more complex than mere manipulation. The sound of my phone buzzing broke the spell. A text message from an unknown number. "Is everything satisfactory?" I knew immediately who it was. With trembling fingers, I typed a response. "Why are you doing this?" The reply came almost instantly. "Because you and Jamie deserve better." I stared at the screen, my throat tight with emotions I couldn't name. Before I could decide whether to respond, another message appeared. "Sleep well, Ellie. Tomorrow will be difficult." The words sent a chill down my spine. How did he know? Had the doctors told him something they hadn't told me? Or was this just another demonstration of his uncanny ability to predict and control our circumstances? I set the phone down without replying and retreated to my own room, where the bed beckoned with its fresh linens and plump pillows. As I sank into its comfort, I tried to make sense of the whirlwind my life had become since that fateful plane ride. Who was Luca Castellano, really? What did he want from us? And why, despite all my misgivings, did part of me want to surrender to the protection he offered? The questions swirled in my mind as exhaustion pulled me under, dragging me into dreams where dark eyes watched from shadows, and strong hands reached out to catch me as I fell. I woke to the sound of Jamie's cries through the baby monitor, and the gray light of dawn filtering through the new curtains. For a disorienting moment, I couldn't remember where I was, the unfamiliar luxury of the bedding confusing my sleep-addled brain. Then it all came rushing back. My mother, the hospital, Luca with his arrangements and his cryptic warnings. Tomorrow will be difficult. I was reaching for my phone to check for missed calls from the hospital when it began to ring in my hand. Unknown number. "Hello?" I answered, my voice rough with sleep and fear. "Miss Sullivan?" A woman's voice, professional, somber. "This is Nurse Jimenez from Atlanta Memorial. I'm calling about your mother." The world seemed to narrow, the edges of my vision darkening as she continued speaking. Words like deteriorated and comfortable and time to say goodbye filtered through the roaring in my ears. "I'll be right there," I managed, already scrambling out of bed. "The car is waiting," the nurse replied, an odd note in her voice. "Mr. Castellano said you'd want to come immediately." Of course he had. Of course he'd known, had arranged, had prepared. I hung up without responding and rushed to the nursery, where Jamie's cries had escalated to full-throated wails. As I lifted him from the crib, I caught sight of the street through the window. A now familiar black SUV idled at the curb, Marco standing beside it, head tilted as if listening to something or someone on his phone. For one wild moment, I considered refusing to go with him, calling a taxi instead, asserting some last vestige of independence, but time was precious now, and pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. 20 minutes later, Jamie fed and both of us dressed. I walked out to the waiting car. Marco opened the door without a word, his face impassive but his eyes holding something that might have been sympathy. I expected to find Luca inside, but the car was empty, save for the driver. Strangely, his absence felt more significant than his presence would have been, a space deliberately left unfilled, a courtesy I hadn't anticipated. The hospital corridors seemed longer this morning, the fluorescent lights harsher. Jamie was quiet in my arms, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. When we reached my mother's room, I paused outside the door, gathering my courage. "You can do this," a low voice said from behind me. I turned to find Luca standing there, his expression solemn. He wore no suit today, just dark slacks and a simple button-down shirt, as if he'd made an effort to be less imposing in this moment. "She's waiting for you," he continued, his hand coming to rest lightly on the small of my back. "I'll take Jamie if you want some time alone with her." The offer was unexpected, and my first instinct was to refuse. But there were things I needed to say to my mother, private things, final things. Just for a few minutes, I conceded, reluctantly transferring my son to Luca's waiting arms. Jamie went willingly, even eagerly, his little hands immediately reaching for Luca's face with a familiarity that should have troubled me more than it did. In that moment, though, I could only feel gratitude for one less worry. "Take as long as you need," Luca said, settling Jamie comfortably against his chest. "We'll be right here." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat, and pushed open the door to say goodbye to the woman who had given me life, who had loved me fiercely if imperfectly, and who was about to leave me truly alone in the world. Or so I thought. The next hours passed in a blur of tears and whispered goodbyes. My mother slipped away peacefully just after noon, her hand in mine, her last words a barely audible, "Be strong." The finality of it, the absolute, irrevocable absence of her, left me hollow, as if something essential had been scooped out of my chest. Throughout it all, Luca remained a silent presence just outside the door, caring for Jamie with an ease that should have seemed unnatural, but somehow didn't. When the nurses came to take my mother's body, when the hospital administrator approached with forms and sympathetic platitudes, when the funeral director arrived to discuss arrangements I couldn't possibly afford, Luca was there, handling everything with quiet efficiency. I should have resented his intervention, his assumption of control. Instead, I found myself pathetically grateful for the buffer he provided between me and the brutal logistics of death. "Everything is taken care of," he told me as we left the hospital, his hand a steady pressure at the small of my back. "The service will be tomorrow afternoon." Small, dignified, as I believe she would have wanted. "Tomorrow?" I echoed, my voice hoarse from crying. "That's so fast." "You mentioned she didn't want to fuss," he replied, guiding me toward the waiting car, where Marco stood with Jamie already secured in his seat, "and I thought perhaps a clean break would be easier, for both of you." He was right, of course. My mother had always been practical about death, insisting she didn't want people standing around crying over a box. And the thought of dragging out the process, of days spent in this limbo of grief, was unbearable. "Thank you," I managed. The words inadequate for the magnitude of what he had done, was doing for us. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." Something darkened in his eyes, a fleeting shadow quickly masked. That's not a concern at the moment. But it was a concern, one that grew more pressing with each act of generosity, each demonstration of his seemingly limitless resources. No one did this much for a stranger without expecting something in return. The question was, what did Luca Castellano want from me? From us, back at my mother's house. No, not hers anymore, I reminded myself with a fresh stab of grief. Mrs. Vasquez was waiting with a simple meal and sympathetic clucking. She took Jamie from me with practiced hands, promising a bath and a bottle while I ate. "You need your strength, Miss Ellie," she insisted, her accent thickening with emotion. "The little one needs you strong." I nodded mechanically and allowed myself to be led to the kitchen table, where Luca pulled out a chair for me. The domesticity of the gesture, the ease with which he moved through this space as if he belonged there, should have alarmed me. Instead, it felt like the only solid thing in a world suddenly made of quicksand. "Eat," he said, taking the seat opposite me. It wasn't a request. I forced myself to take a bite of the soup Mrs. Vasquez had prepared, then another. The flavors barely registered, but the warmth spread through my chest, thawing some of the ice that had formed there. "What happens now?" I asked after several minutes of silence, my spoon scraping the bottom of the empty bowl. Luca studied me across the table, his dark eyes unreadable. "That depends on you." "On me?" A bitter laugh escaped my throat. "What choices do I have? I can't afford to stay here. I can't afford to leave. I have a son to feed, rent due in 2 weeks, and barely enough savings to get us back to Miami." "You have options," he replied evenly. "More than you realize." "Such as?" He leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table, hands clasped loosely together. I noticed again the subtle imperfections of those hands, the slightly crooked knuckle on his right index finger, a thin scar across the back of his left hand. The hands of a man who had known violence. "I have a proposition for you," he said, his voice pitched low, despite the fact that we were alone, Mrs. Vasquez having taken Jamie upstairs. "One that would solve your financial concerns permanently." My heart rate accelerated, a flush of heat rising to my cheeks. "I'm not for sale, Mr. Castellano." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "I'm not in the business of buying people, Ellie." "Then what exactly are you proposing?" He was silent for a moment, his gaze unwavering. "I want you and Jamie to come to New York with me." The statement hung in the air between us, simple yet laden with implications. "Why?" I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because I can provide for you both," he replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "A home, security, opportunities you couldn't otherwise access. In exchange for what?" His expression softened fractionally. "Your company, your presence in my home, the chance to watch Jamie grow. You want us as, what, live-in companions?" The idea was absurd, like something from a Victorian novel. "I want you as family," he corrected, the words striking me like physical blows. "Jamie is my son. You as—" "Stop!" I cut him off, pushing back from the table. "This is insane. You don't know us. We met 3 days ago on a plane. And in those 3 days, I've learned enough," he countered, remaining seated even as I stood. "I've watched how you care for your son, how you tended to your mother, how you carry the weight of responsibility without complaint. I've seen your strength, your vulnerability, your fierce protection of those you love. That's not enough to—" "It's enough for me," he interrupted, his voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. "I know what I want, Ellie. I always have. And you always get what you want," I challenged, anger beginning to burn through the fog of grief. A smile then, cold and certain. "Yes." The single syllable sent a shiver down my spine. In that moment, I glimpsed something beneath the polished exterior, something primal and unyielding. "Why me?" I asked, genuinely bewildered. "Why Jamie? You could have anyone. Someone from your world. Someone who fits—" "I don't want anyone," he cut in. "I want you. Both of you." "But why?" He rose then, his movement fluid and controlled as he circled the table to stand before me. This close, I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze, a position that emphasized the difference in our heights, our power. "Jamie reminds me of someone I lost," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "a child who never had the chance to grow up. When I saw him on that plane, something shifted. And then I saw you, exhausted, alone, fighting so hard for him. And I knew." "Knew what?" My own voice had gone hoarse. His hand came up, fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face with exquisite gentleness. "That you were the missing pieces. The ones I've been searching for without knowing it." There was something raw in his confession, a vulnerability I hadn't expected from this controlled, powerful man. It should have moved me, perhaps. Instead, alarm bells rang in my mind. You can't replace a lost child with my son, I said, taking a step back. And you can't buy a ready-made family to fill whatever void you're carrying. Anger flashed in his eyes, there and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. That's not what this is. Then what is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a man with too much money and too much power fixating on a woman and child he doesn't know, offering to solve all their problems in exchange for… What? Playing house? Fulfilling some fantasy of fatherhood? His jaw tightened, a muscle ticking visibly beneath the smooth skin. I'm offering you a better life, safety, security, everything Jamie deserves. At what cost? I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. There's always a cost, Luca. For a long moment, he simply looked at me, his expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate slowness, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. The cost, he said, opening it to reveal a diamond ring that caught the kitchen light in blinding facets, is marriage. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. You can't be serious. I'm always serious. His voice had taken on that edge again, the one that brooked no argument. I want you as my wife, Jamie as my son, a legal binding arrangement that gives you both my name, my protection, my legacy. This is insane, I whispered, unable to tear my eyes from the obscene sparkle of the diamond. We don't know each other. We don't love each other. Love, he repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. An unpredictable emotion at best, destructive at worst. I'm offering something more reliable. Commitment, loyalty, resources. Marriage isn't a business transaction, isn't it? His smile was knowing, almost sad. Throughout history, marriage has primarily been an exchange of security for fidelity. The romantic notion is relatively recent and statistically unstable. I shook my head, trying to clear it of his persuasive logic. Even if that were true, why would you want to marry a stranger, a waitress with no connections, no money, nothing to bring to this transaction? His expression softened then, the hardness in his eyes giving way to something that might have been tenderness. You bring yourself, Ellie, your strength, your heart, the way you love your son with such fierce devotion. These are rare qualities, worth more than any fortune or connection. The sincerity in his voice was disarming, making it harder to dismiss his proposal as the ravings of a madman or the calculated move of a predator. There was something else at work here, something I couldn't quite grasp. And if I refuse? I asked, my voice barely audible. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle coiling of potential energy. Then I will respect your decision. The funeral expenses, your mother's medical bills, they remain paid. You return to Miami, to your life, and we part ways. It sounded reasonable, civilized. So why did a chill run down my spine? Just like that? I pressed, suspicious. You'd walk away? I would step back. He corrected carefully, but I would watch over you both from a distance. Ensure you never truly wanted for anything essential. That's stalking, I stammered, backing away until I felt the kitchen counter against my spine. He followed, closing the distance between us with 2 measured steps. That's protection. The world is a dangerous place, Ellie, especially for a beautiful woman and her fatherless son. The implied threat, or was it a warning, hung in the air between us. Before I could respond, the sound of Jamie's laughter floated down from upstairs, followed by Mrs. Vasquez's gentle cooing. He needs a father, Luca said softly, his gaze drifting toward the ceiling. A man to guide him, protect him, show him how to navigate a world that will not always be kind. And you think that should be you? I asked, genuine confusion coloring my tone. A man I know nothing about? His attention returned to me, sharp and focused. What do you want to know? The question caught me off guard. I'd expected evasion, not an invitation. Everything. Who you are, what you do, where your money comes from, why you can afford to throw around thousands of dollars on strangers. For a moment, I thought he might refuse, might retreat behind the wall of cool control he typically maintained. Instead, he nodded once, decisively. My name is Luca Alessandro Castellano. I was born in Sicily, raised in New York. My father built an empire importing olive oil, wine, and certain other commodities that circumvented taxation. When he died, I inherited his business, his connections, and his enemies. The clinical way he delivered this information, devoid of emotion or embellishment, made it all the more chilling. You're in the Mafia, I said, the realization settling like ice in my veins. That's an oversimplification, he replied, neither confirming nor denying. I manage extensive legitimate business interests across multiple industries. I also maintain certain traditional associations that operate outside conventional legal frameworks. A laugh bubbled up from my chest, slightly hysterical. That's a very fancy way of saying yes. His expression remained impassive. The distinction matters, Ellie. What I'm offering you and Jamie is a life within the legitimate sphere of my world. The protection of my name without the complications of my other activities. You can't separate those things, I argued, finding my voice again. If you're who I think you are, danger follows you. Enemies, as you said, police attention, violence. All managed with the utmost discretion, he countered smoothly. My wife and child would be untouchable, sacred. This is understood by everyone in my world. Until it isn't, I whispered. Images from crime movies and news headlines flashing through my mind, until someone decides to hurt you through them. A darkness passed over his features, something ancient and terrible. Anyone who tried would not live long enough to regret it. The quiet certainty in his voice should have terrified me. Instead, I felt a treacherous shiver of something else. Protection, security, the primal comfort of a predator who hunts on your behalf rather than for you. This is crazy, I said, more to myself than to him. I can't marry a man I just met, a man involved in whatever you're involved in. It's insane. Is it? He asked, his voice gentle now. More insane than returning to a life of struggle and uncertainty? More insane than denying Jamie the opportunities my name and resources would provide? Don't use my son to manipulate me, I snapped, anger flaring. I'm simply stating facts, Luca replied, undeterred. Your options are limited. Your prospects in Miami are bleak. Your debts are mounting. Jamie deserves better than a life of constant struggle. Each word struck like a physical blow, because each word was true. My life in Miami was a daily battle against poverty, against predatory men, against a system designed to keep people like me trapped in cycles of debt and desperation. I don't love you, I said finally, clinging to the most obvious objection. Not yet, he conceded with surprising humility. But respect can grow into affection, and affection into deeper attachment. I'm not asking for your heart, Ellie, just your presence, your loyalty, and the chance to be a father to Jamie. And if it doesn't work, if I'm miserable, if Jamie is unhappy, then arrangements can be made, he said after a slight hesitation. Financial provisions that would ensure neither of you ever wanted for anything, even if we parted ways. It was all so reasonable, so carefully considered. He had an answer for everything, a solution for every problem. Except the fundamental wrongness of marrying a virtual stranger with connections to organized crime. I need time, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Time to think, to process all of this. My mother just died, Luca. I can't make life-altering decisions right now. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once, decisively. The funeral is tomorrow. After that, I'll give you 3 days. Then I need your answer. 3 days isn't enough. It has to be. He interrupted, his tone final. My business requires my return to New York. I can delay only so long. The ring box still lay open on the counter between us, the diamond catching light even in the shadows. Luca reached for it, closed it with a soft snap, and slipped it back into his pocket. When you're ready, he said, the words heavy with meaning. Upstairs, Jamie began to cry, his hungry wail cutting through the tension like a knife. Mrs. Vasquez called down that he needed feeding, her voice apologetic. Go, Luca said, stepping back to give me space. He needs you. I moved past him, grateful for the excuse to escape the intensity of his presence, the weight of his proposal. At the base of the stairs, I paused, turning back to find him watching me with that same inscrutable expression. "Why me?" I asked again, needing to understand. "Of all the women in the world, why choose someone like me?" Something shifted in his gaze, a softening that transformed his entire face. "Because when you fell asleep on my shoulder, trusting me with your vulnerability, something broke open inside me. And when I held Jamie while you said goodbye to your mother, something healed. I can't explain it more clearly than that." The raw honesty in his voice struck me more powerfully than any of his logical arguments or subtle threats. For the first time, I glimpsed the man beneath the power and control. A man perhaps as lonely and adrift as I was, in his own way. 3 days, I acknowledged, then turned and climbed the stairs to my son, my mind a whirlwind of fear, grief, and a treacherous, forbidden hope. The funeral passed in a haze of tears and whispered condolences from neighbors and distant relatives I barely remembered. Through it all, Luca remained a solid presence at my side, his hand at the small of my back guiding me, supporting me when my knees threatened to buckle beneath the weight of finality. Jamie, dressed in a tiny black suit I'd never seen before, was passed from arms to arms, cooed over and bounced, oblivious to the significance of the day. Whenever his little face scrunched up in distress, Luca would appear as if summoned, taking him with those surprisingly gentle hands, soothing him with murmured words in Italian that seemed to work like magic. It was during the reception afterward, watching Luca move through the crowd with my son in his arms, that the reality of his proposal truly hit me. This could be our future, Jamie growing up with this powerful, dangerous man as his father. Learning from him, being shaped by him, protected by him. The thought was both terrifying and, in some deep, primal part of me, deeply appealing. "He's good with the baby," Mrs. Vasquez observed, appearing at my elbow with a plate of food I hadn't asked for but desperately needed. "A natural father, that one." I accepted the plate with a murmured thanks, my eyes still tracking Luca and Jamie through the crowd. "You seem to know him well," she shrugged, a small, knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I know of him. His reputation. And," I prompted, suddenly desperate for an outside perspective. Some insight that might help me make sense of the impossible choice before me. "He is a man of his word," she said carefully, her eyes meeting mine with unexpected intensity. "What he promises, he delivers. What he protects stays safe." "But at what cost?" I whispered, the question that had been haunting me since his proposal. Mrs. Vasquez's expression grew solemn. "There is always a cost to security, Nina. The question is whether the price is one you can live with." With that cryptic statement, she moved away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of the decision looming before me. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended state. Luca maintained a respectful distance, appearing only briefly each morning and evening to check on us, to ensure we had everything we needed. The rest of the time, Marco's silent, watchful presence outside the house reminded me that we were never truly alone, never unwatched. I spent those days in a fever of research, using my mother's ancient computer to search for any information about Luca Castellano. The results were both revealing and frustratingly opaque. There were mentions of his legitimate businesses: import, export, real estate, a chain of high-end restaurants, but nothing concrete linking him to criminal activities. Just whispers, implications, the shadow of something darker beneath the surface of respectability. On the 3rd day, as the sun began to set, painting the small living room in shades of amber and gold, I heard the now familiar sound of the SUV pulling up outside. My heart rate accelerated, my palms suddenly slick with sweat. Jamie, playing on a blanket at my feet, looked up at the sound, his little face brightening with recognition. Even my baby knew who had arrived. The knock came, 3 precise taps that seemed to echo through my entire body. When I opened the door, Luca stood on the threshold, more formally dressed than he had been in days, back in one of his impeccable suits. In his hand was a small velvet box, not the one from before, but similar. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I stepped back, allowing him entry. watching as his gaze immediately sought and found Jamie on the floor. Something in his expression softened, just for a moment, before returning to its usual controlled mask when he looked back at me. "You've made your decision," he stated rather than asked. I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. "I have conditions." A slight lift of his eyebrow was the only indication of surprise. "I'm listening." "Jamie comes first," I began, the words I'd rehearsed for hours tumbling out. "His safety, his happiness, his future, all of it takes priority over everything else." "Of course," Luca agreed without hesitation. "I want my own bank account," I continued, forcing myself to meet his gaze. "Money that's mine, that I control, enough that I could leave if things don't work out." A flash of something, anger, respect, crossed his features before he nodded once. "Reasonable. What else?" "No lies," I said, the words catching slightly in my throat. "I don't expect to know everything about your business. But what you do tell me has to be the truth." This condition seemed to give him pause. He considered it for a long moment before responding. "I will never lie to you, Ellie. There may be things I cannot share, but what I do share will be truth." I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the most difficult condition. "And I won't share your bed. Not unless I choose to. Not until there's something real between us." The silence that followed was deafening. Luca's expression revealed nothing, but I could sense the tension radiating from him, the careful control he was exerting. "You ask for a marriage in name only?" he finally asked, his voice deceptively soft. "For now," I clarified, heart pounding. "I'm not saying never. I'm saying not yet. Not until I know you. Not until I trust you." He studied me for what felt like an eternity, his dark eyes unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he smiled. A genuine smile that transformed his severe features into something almost boyish. "You continue to surprise me, Ellie Sullivan," he said, a note of admiration in his voice. "Most women in your position would not have the courage to set terms. Is that a yes or a no?" I pressed, unwilling to be distracted by compliments. "It's a yes," he replied simply, "to all your conditions." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a wave of panic. Had I really just agreed to marry this man? This dangerous, powerful stranger who had swept into our lives like a force of nature? As if sensing my sudden doubt, Luca crossed the room to where Jamie played, kneeling down beside him with a grace that belied his size. My son looked up, face breaking into a delighted smile as he reached for Luca with complete trust. "Hello, little one," Luca murmured, lifting Jamie with practiced ease. "It seems we're to be family after all." The sight of them together, Jamie's tiny hand patting Luca's cheek, Luca's expression of naked adoration, made my chest tight with emotions I couldn't name. This was why I was saying yes, not for the security, not for the money, but for this. The chance to give my son a father who looked at him like he was the center of the universe. "When?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Luca turned to me. Jamie settled comfortably in his arms. "We leave for New York tomorrow. The ceremony can be as soon as we arrive, or we can wait a few weeks if you prefer. Either way, I'd like Jamie to carry my name as soon as possible." The speed of it all made my head spin. "Tomorrow? But there's so much to do, to pack." "It's handled," he interrupted gently. "Mrs. Vasquez has been helping prepare your things. Whatever you need in New York that isn't already packed, we can purchase there." Of course. Of course he had already arranged everything, confident in my eventual acquiescence. I should have been angry at the presumption, but I was too exhausted, too overwhelmed by the rapid changes in my life to summon the emotion. Luca approached me then, Jamie still in his arms, and with his free hand, he withdrew the small velvet box I'd noticed earlier. "This is for you," he said, opening it to reveal not a ring, but a delicate gold necklace with a small key pendant, inset with tiny diamonds. "The ring will come later, when we make our vows. This is a promise, from me to you." "A key?" I asked, confused by the symbolism. "To my home," he explained, his voice low and intimate. "To my world, to everything I possess. What's mine will be yours, Ellie, and what's yours?" His gaze dropped meaningfully to Jamie. will be cherished beyond measure. He lifted the necklace from the box, and I turned automatically, allowing him to fasten it around my neck. The pendant rested just above my heart, its weight slight but significant. "Tomorrow," he repeated, his breath warm against my ear as he stepped back. A new beginning for all of us. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in deepening shadows, I reached up to touch the key at my throat. I had made my choice, for better or worse, for Jamie's future and my own survival. I had unlocked a door to a new life, one filled with luxury and protection, but also with unknown dangers and compromises. The question that remained, hanging in the air between us as Luca smiled down at my son with possessive tenderness, was whether I had just saved us or sold us to the highest bidder. Only time would tell if falling asleep on a mafia boss's shoulder had been the greatest mistake of my life, or its salvation. Thank you so much for joining me on this thrilling journey with Ellie, Jamie, and the mysterious Luca Castellano. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more captivating tales like this one. Drop a comment below telling me what you think happens next for this unlikely family. Will Ellie find true love with her dangerous new husband? What secrets might Luca still be hiding? I can't wait to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep reading and dreaming.